I'm Jeanelle, Ablola. I'm my mom's daughter, my dad's daughter too. And I'll just get a few things out of the way. I am a pastor. I'm a pastor in San Francisco, and yes, I realize I do look like my dad a lot. So just get that out of the way. I don't know what that says about your prettiness, Auntie Esther. So typically, the daughter, so I'm the youngest and I'm the daughter. So, typically the daughter of the deceased wouldn't be the one to deliver the homily. Since I'm also mourning the passing of my mom too. And I myself am also in need of comfort. But, you know, when the community, when the family says that this is what I should do and that mom would want me to do it, then I'm going to do it. So you may have noticed that in this memorial service, the scripture readings that we're focusing on aren't your typical ones that you would really focus on in the funeral service, right? We're not focusing on Psalm 23. We're not focusing on 2 Timothy 4, which says, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Instead, we're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 13. My dad's actually had the scripture reading in his mind since the day that my mom passed. And we felt that there was no other scripture text that resonated as strongly for how my mom lived. And for those of you who knew my mom in many positive ways, she wasn't your typical friend. She wasn't your typical classmate. She wasn't the typical church member, the typical auntie, cousin, sister, patient, or mom. She stood out. Some say that the relationship between a mother and a daughter is a unique one. Author Victoria Secunda writes, a daughter is a mother's gender partner, her closest ally in the family confederacy, an extension of herself. And mothers are their daughter's role model, their biological and emotional roadmap, the arbiter of all their relationships. And like any relationship that lasts over years, my mom and I had our ups and downs with how we related to one another. But throughout those ups and downs, there were some great things about my mom that were steadfast and only grew stronger over the years. We all know my mom's sense of humor, how she liked to make people laugh, how she used humor to build connections and to lighten the hearts of others. My mom's really hilarious. And a lot of jokes, as Chloe said, a lot of jokes that I have in my everyday life situations are from her. And I'm sure several of us have cultivated our own inside jokes with my mom throughout the time we've known her. I remember in Canada, this phrase became popular, patiko kilay, which means even the eyebrow. I don't know what that joke was about, but that became a phrase that we would hear throughout the entire vacation. We all know that when my mom dropped something, she would say, ay, put that. We all know that when we're in Las Vegas trying to fit into a small parking space and the garage was too short and we were in a big van, she would say, ay, liliit ang bayan. We know that whenever she wanted me to take a shower or for me to wash my clothes, and I would always respond, why, it doesn't stink, she would always say, that's what the skunk says. So one of us would fart or something and we'd be like, it doesn't stink, and she'd be like, that's what the skunk says. And even one of the last jokes while she was in hospice, she had this oxygen mask to help her breathe that had some medicine in it, help her breathe. And I saw that there was a hair in it. And I said, Mom, there's a hair in your mask. And she made this wavy sign. And I said, no, Mom, it's not that kind of hair. I knew that whenever I was in my mom's presence, she'd tell me some joke. And if it was corny, we both laugh our fake laugh. Our fake laugh was, And we knew that when she would call you on your birthday, you would hear, And my mom had a nickname for me, being the only girl. She called me Pepe, or Miss Pepe, or Miss Cookies. I don't know if you all have heard that joke, so I won't get into it. And when I go to the Philippines pretty regularly for pastoral and solidarity mission trips. And I always take her jokes with me. Was it University of Santo Tomas, right? UST, Lutot Sabay Kae. I would bring those jokes and they'd be like, how do you know those? Those are old. And I was like, it's my mom. My mom's telling me these jokes. So her jokes were global. But my mom, she wasn't just funny. She was tender too. Well into my 20s, I was sitting in her lap still. And occasionally, at class reunions or whatever, they would see my mom and I, and they would call us sweet by her friends. And for those of you who remember me at almost any church camp, like family camps or whatever, you remember me crying because I had separation anxiety from my mom. She always wanted to sit next to me on the couch, and whenever we were walking around Plaza Venida, she would hold my arm. She also always made it a point to tell me that she loved me whenever we're talking on the phone, and even when she texted me at night. She made sure that we knew that she loved us, and I never doubted she did. I might have questioned how she showed that love, but I never felt like she didn't care about us and didn't have our best interests in her mind. Even towards the end, when it was hard for her to remember what she was going to say, she would ask for us to help her out while she was in hospice, and I would go to her. By the time I would go to her, she would forget what she was trying to ask me for, and she would just fill in by saying, "I love you." Another thing you all may know of my mom is her faith. Church was her life. I might as well have grown up a PK. I don't know if you all know, I'm not going to call out everybody here, but there's a lot of clergy in this room, retired and active. The first song I really learned to sing was Seek Ye First, because my mom and I would sing it together on our -1 singing machine. The first thing I really memorized was the Lord's Prayer because my parents had me say it every night before going to sleep when I was a child. My dad would be asleep before it finished. My mom was the first person who really taught me about God's grace, who always put in the back of my mind whenever I had any hard questions of faith, grace. It took a long time for me to even grasp the concept of God's grace at all, but I could see it in her life. My mom's faith wasn't based in maintaining doctrine or creeds or memorizing this or that. It wasn't based on certainty, but was based in faithfulness, in a lived faithfulness. She strived to put her faith into practice through the ways that she related to others, listened to others, and supported others in their own journeys through life. People went to her for advice, for guidance, or people went to her just to complain and gossip. And I know this, not just because she shared the chismes with me, but I know this because she taught me how to listen to others. My mom is great at accompanying folks through their struggles, and walking with folks through their struggles. She provides advice. She tries not to impose, allowing for folks to be free to walk their own paths, at least until they start really pushing her buttons. Even then, holding a grudge was just too much energy and stress for my mom. She preferred to just forgive as much as she could and let go as much as she could possibly let go. Not only was my mom gracious with others, she had faith in God's grace, which meant that instead of her faith being a belief, a head thing, her faith was rooted in practice, a heart and gut thing. She strived to live the love and graciousness that she knew God extended to her unconditionally and and always. She used to tell me that you don't do anything to save yourself, you're already saved. And so the way you live your life is in response to that fact that you're already saved. You're already whole because of God's unending grace and love. So we should be participants of God's grace and love. She was always open to learning, and her faith was not one in which she strived to earn anything other than understanding of the divine and of people around her. Because she was so open to learning and growing, she was able to live a love that adapts, an adaptive love. Not a wishy-washy love, not a love without conviction, but a love rooted in God's grace that adapts so that there's space for people to grow and really be who they are, so that there's space for people like me to become who God calls us to be. My mom was very supportive of me and of most of the things I wanted to do. She wasn't supportive of everything, though. She wasn't supportive of my wanting to drop out of college, or wanting to join the military, or wanting to be an actress or comedian. But she was supportive of me wanting to be a graphic designer, wanting to be an educator, and was supportive of me taking the step towards seminary, during which time I would eventually end up into pastoral ministry and justice work. She accepted me for who I am and who God continues to create me to be and become. She allowed me to leave home, to venture outside of Paradise Hills, outside of San Diego, not to play into certain gender roles, not to be a typical girl. And I believe that would be difficult for any mother to do for their youngest child, their only daughter. To give them the freedom to be who God calls them and creates them to be, rooted in faith that they will live a life pleasing to God, especially in this world of ours. Mom recognized that there are many ways for people to live God's love because my mom knew that God's love was limitless. As a mother, she probably had a deeper understanding of love for a child, which helped her to understand the bigness of God's love for all of us. Because of this, I know in my mind, I know that she is with God. My experience of God's love tells me that she must be with God now. And I know that God will always have the final word. God will always have the final word in the whole scheme of creation. Death is not an end, but a new beginning. But right now, I can only feel in my heart her absence. And I'd like to think that our willingness to face that reality of her absence will only make us all stronger in compassion and in understanding. That this will invite us into a time when we can further open up towards those we wouldn't usually open up to. This becomes an invitation to finding strength in tenderness, to find strength in beloved community, to find strength in our vulnerability. Because towards the end of Mom's life, her spirit remained joyous because she was able to find strength in her vulnerable condition. And she was able to find strength in the ways that we are interdependent, interconnected with one another. Poet Maya Angelou, whose birthday just passed, writes this about her mother, who also passed because of cancer. She writes, "You see, love liberates. It doesn't bind. Love says, I love you. I love you if you're in China. I love you if you're across town. I love you if you're in Harlem. I love you. I would like to be near you. I would like to have your arms around me. I would like to have your voice in my ear, but that's old. That's ego. Love liberates." My mom will always be in my heart. in my spirit, in my ministry, in my veins, and in my tears of joy and sorrow. But I know that I cannot contain her, because love liberates. I know that on our paths to liberation, on our paths to being part of God's collective and loving life, we will always be connected, and we will see each other again. Let us be sad. Let us be angry. Let us even wrestle with the doubts that arise, as theologian Paul Tillich reminds us that faith must have doubt in order to remain dynamic. Let us not confuse strength for weakness and weakness for strength. Let us allow our hearts to be broken, as that might be the only way right now that God's healing and wholeness can find its way back in. Many of us will be hurting for many years to come. But in the meantime, let us find God's comfort through one another. Let us be God's comfort for one another, assured that we will be living in ways that would have been pleasing to Mom and to God. Some say there's a reason that things like this happen, but I don't necessarily believe that. But I do believe that God graciously and creatively works with us and through us, so that when tragedy does strike, God will make room for goodness and love can spring forth. Let us come together and open up towards that goodness and that love. May God embrace us and liberate all of us. And in the midst of God's tight embrace, may we feel Mom's presence, hear her whisper, hear her jokes and her laughter. May we always remember her by embodying the goodness and the joy that she has lovingly bestowed on us while she was here with us. Amen.